Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hey everyone, and welcome to All Together, the Family Science Insights podcast, produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Dina Sargent. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome back to the show. Having different people with different roles, expectations, and mindsets without healthy boundaries can create a dynamic that won't last too long. And sometimes family members can seem more like housemates that frustrate each other to no end than a family that cares for and respects each other. So, to help us understand this and learn more about how to prevent it, joining us today is Professor Megan McCoy, whose expertise involves marriage and family therapy as well as financial therapy, teaching courses at the undergraduate, graduate, and doctoral levels at Kansas State University. Megan has published over 40 articles in top-tier mental health, family science, financial counseling, and financial planning journals. So welcome to the show, Megan. It's great to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you about this because I feel like my family doesn't have great boundaries, so I can learn a lot from this. And I'm trying to turn things around as one of as part of the younger generation. So I'm curious to know, in your line of work, how have you seen boundary ambiguity manifest in families?
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, I was originally trained as a marriage and family therapist. And when I think about boundaries, I kind of think of it as both the level of closeness, like it's wonderful to love your family. But there still needs to be like a sense of I separate from our loved ones, that balance between closeness and distance without getting too enmeshed. And then flexibility around the roles. Like there needs to be some ability to change and have new rules and roles in the family, but we also have to know who owns what as well. So that balance is the goal. And so, as you mentioned, I am also a financial therapist, and it's been fascinating in both my research and my clinical practice to examine the boundaries around financial roles and how we balance again having openness and honesty with both our partner and our children, while also making sure it's developmentally appropriate and that we have the sense of privacy, not secrecy in a relationship.
Yeah, and that's so many things to take into consideration as well. I'm assuming it also depends on, the roles that an individual holds in the family. So, for example, sibling relationship is going to look different from a parental relationship, right?
Oh, absolutely. Each subsystem will have different rules and therefore different boundaries of what is shared and not shared. Even though sometimes I feel like as soon as I tell my sister something, my mom automatically knows. That's not always a good
Yeah.
thing.
Okay, that's really interesting. And I would love to learn more from you and go further into detail about this. But before we do that, let's get to know you a little bit better. This is Have You Met Megan? And my first question that I have is, do you read any books? Is there a favorite that you have?
Yes. I'll start with some of my nerdy books and then move into some of the fairy books. No, just kidding. But my favorite book of all time was this book called Facilitating Financial Health. And I know that sounds dry, but it's actually not dry. It was a book written for both financial professionals and mental health professionals to understand the meaning of money and exercises that can help people explain their money story more coherently. I think another really great role is a book that is called Essentialism, has so much to do with what we're talking about today. Because it's about the idea that like sometimes when we're able to say no, we can provide more of our energy and attention to the things that make us joyful or that we're good at. And so that idea of creating boundaries by clearly defining what is my role and what is not my role can be really helpful. So I think those two books are very pertinent for this convo.
Oh wow, I need to read that book.
Oh,
The
it has a
second,
whole
well,
chapter
yeah,
on how to say no, an entire chapter. And I think about them a lot. I don't always do it, but I think about it at least now.
yeah. That would be so useful for me. I'm trying to think about how to say no to going to a New Year's Eve party
Oh,
right
yes.
now. I've been thinking
Yes.
like, should I just be like, yes, I have plans to sleep, or should I just be like, yeah, should I avoid saying what I'm up to, or like I don't feel like doing that. I
or
don't want to.
or I think
Yeah.
that like one-on-one, I would be able to like give you so much more attention without having to worry about everybody else. So I'd rather plan another time with you.
Okay, that is true. That's a good one. Okay, I see the value of the book now. I'm gonna have
Yes.
to look that up. Thank you for sharing that. My next question for you is: what about films or TV shows? Are there any that you've enjoyed recently?
I just finished Black Doves. It doesn't have anything to do with this, but I love a strong female protagonist and any kind of intrigue, and it was very good.
Yeah. Okay. So tell us more about that. What is it
Yes.
about? What's the premise of the show?
Yes, it's a BBC show that's now on Netflix, and stars Keira Knightley, who was secretly a spy implanted into a politician's life and became his wife and the mother of his children, and then intrigue inspires after that. It's very
Oh,
entertaining.
that sounds really fun. What do you like most about the show?
Oh, I just like when there's a strong female character. Like there was a great interview of actress one time, and she's like, I can always tell when the script of a script of a movie is written by a man because there's always a moment where the woman turns to the man and says, "So what do we do now?" And so any movie that anybody, not just the cisgender man, can decide what's the next step, but anybody has some power. It's just fun for me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's a really interesting one as well. But as for podcasts, are there any that you listen to?
Yes. Oh, I'm trying to think of some of my favorites. I really like the Freakonomics podcast. I think they do some interesting stories, and it's so funny because as a researcher, when I'm constantly finding myself questioning is research, and Freakonomics does a good job of presenting multiple perspectives and how numbers can lie and how assumptions that we think are true may not be true. And I love that idea of like, let's not make assumptions. Let's keep on doing more and better research and really understanding what's out there.
Yeah, I love the sound of that. I've always when it comes to reading research or like using any studies or anything like that, because a lot of people are of the opinion that facts are facts and science means like facts and it's like Bible and stuff like that, which by and large, there is some truth in that. But I've always wondered, these scientists or researchers, like we all have opinions, and we all go and do things based on these opinions, and you know academia, while a lot of it is based on like evidence and stuff like that, but what drives us to conduct these studies or like do this research in a certain way is entirely based on our experiences, and I find that beautiful, but also it's something that's really important to take into account when looking at these studies and research, right?
Yeah. With my first year doctoral student, they get so tired of all my red ink on anything that's said definitively. We don't know anything definitively. And once we have enough studies that really says this might be true, then the culture, the time, the people change and evolve, and then it's no longer true anymore. So like research is this constant drive of questioning what we make assumptions on and trying to build on those to figure out what works for people the best.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds like a really interesting recommendation. But now moving on to the next question. Is there anyone that you look up to either in your professional life or your personal life?
Oh, this is so fun. I wrote down a bunch of answers, and now I can't remember what I prepped, so I'm gonna go off off the wing or whatever that expression is. But I as you mentioned in the intro, I am a financial therapist. I actually was the first certified financial therapist, that designation, which is relatively new. But there were some founders of financial therapy that I got to work alongside, still get to work alongside, and two of them that I fangirl every time I see them is Christy Archuleta and Sonia Luter, who really really drove the field of financial therapy, looking that intersection between money and well-being forward. And I'm a big fan of their work.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And what do you admire the most about them?
Ah, they took something that people question. Like I remember when I first started introducing myself as a financial therapist, every mental health professional I worked with went, "You can't call yourself a therapist." And I was like, I am a licensed marriage and family therapist as well, but therapy is a term we use occupational therapy, massage therapy, physical therapy to say I understand the underlying like mechanisms. That's the word. Mechanisms for how these things work, and I want to massage or make better. And so financial therapists are focused on massaging your relationship with money and making it better. But there was a lot of pushback from both mental health professionals who didn't like talking about money, as well as financial professionals who didn't like talking about emotions. And Sonia and Christy persevered and were pioneers in a field that many people didn't support initially. And now so many people see the value in.
I love that so much because you know how in the past there's a stereotype that women are too emotional, and it still rings like it still has some strength, in this day. But it's wonderful how these women took that emotional side of them and turned it into something so good that nobody can actually refute. Finance is very much intertwined with our emotions, and finance behavioral science sector now is incredible, and
Yes.
it's doing so much good for people.
Ah,
So yeah,
I'm
they,
excited
yeah.
to see the progress. I know I'm digressing where we should be getting to other topics, but when Sonia was starting out, she actually did a study with Dottie Durbin out of Texas Tech around how many mental health programs actually provide any kind of electives on financial stressors in the family or the impact of finances in the family. And it was something like 6 schools out of all the United States training programs were even touching on it, despite the fact that APA for every year for over like I think 15 years now has said finances is number one stressors in the family. The only year it wasn't was when COVID took number one spot with health. But every other year, finance has been the number one issue, and human development and family science and marriage and family therapy programs are not giving enough space to talk about the effect on the family.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And the role models that you've picked sound amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I had no idea that, the financial therapy space was started by two women, and that's really inspiring to me.
Yes, there were some
So
wonderful men too, but I really look up to those two.
yeah, that's going to stick with me for sure. So thanks for sharing that. My last question for you is, has there been a course or class that you've taken that has stuck with you to this date?
Oh, so many. Probably narrative family therapy was the most impactful course. I'm from a family from Ireland originally. We're all big storytellers, and when I learned that you could use people's story of their life as a way of reshaping how they see the world, it just struck a nerve in me. It felt so authentic to me. And I love the research called evidence based. I mean, not evidence based. What is it called? It's called Common Factors in Family Therapy that says that idea that working out of a theoretical stance that feels authentic to you as a person, it makes it more powerful. When I learned about narrative therapy, I was like, this is the one for me.
Oh, that's really nice
Yeah.
to hear. And what was the biggest lesson that you've learned from it?
Well, one of the big ones was I am very hard on myself. I'm like the stereotypical firstborn daughter, and I realized that in learning narrative therapy, that I tended to talk to myself so meanly. I tended to tell stories that were very problematic about me, while so empathetic of other people. And so being able to recognize that voice and trying to give other voices room to also be kind to myself was really important to me.
Yeah, is that an oldest daughter thing? Because I'm the oldest daughter as well. That's why I gasped when you said you're the oldest daughter.
Perfectionist.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because like I just kind of thought that it was, I don't know, like because of how I was brought up. But I suppose that's got to do with being the oldest daughter. Because I definitely was criticized way more harshly than my brothers were. It's kind of like, yeah, it's not my parents' fault. Like, they were just doing the best they could. It's just that, like, yeah, like as the oldest daughter, you're the guinea pig, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I have two daughters myself, and I catch myself replicating this pattern of holding the oldest to such a higher standard because she just always seemed older. You know, when you have
Yeah.
a 3 year old and a 5 year old, the 5 year old seems so big and loud and smart, you know, so you hold them to a higher standard. But when you have a 5 year old and a 3 year old, all of a sudden the 3 year old looks like a little baby that you just want to keep a baby. So this dynamic is like a positive feedback loop that's hard to break.
Yeah, for sure. I noticed that happens with my youngest brother as well, because my youngest brother has such a baby face and he has like very babyish, childish mannerisms. And like I do this to my youngest brother too. I hold myself to a higher standard, and for him, I'm like, "Oh, you're a baby. Let me refill your
You have
water
plenty
bottle
of
for you. You
time.
12-year
Yes.
old. I'm gonna, yeah."
I
Um,
could go I could go into the birth order research so much. You should do a podcast on somebody smarter and more knowledgeable in that area than me. But it's fascinating because the research won't actually show significant findings often because there's so many confounding variables. So, like for instance, my dad is the fourth out of six. But the three before him had left the house when he was little, and the two after him had like were so much younger that he was kind of like an only child. He acts like an only child. So when you do a survey, the traits associated with the middle child don't come up, the traits of an only child. Anyway, there's so many confounding variables that make the research hard, but there's something there.
Yes, I mean, like, not your exact situation that's always on my mind, but like similar situations, like the general situation of how like it's really hard with humans to really like do quantitative research, right? Because it's really situational. But anyway, before I digress, which I fear I have already quite a bit, let's
Me
head
too.
straight into the interview and get started on this. I'm really excited, and I feel like we both can talk about the oldest daughter experience when it comes to healthy boundaries as well. So I think that will be pretty special. But for starters, how would you define family?
Family. I think family is an evolving term, and I hope that definitions of family have expanded to include not only our nuclear family or our expanded family or our family that we married into, but also our chosen family, our fictive kid, the people that around us that we have some shared sense of identity that makes us like a system. That's who I think family is, the people that you can trust and rely on and hopefully love.
Yeah, and how would you describe the position of a family in today's society, compared to a few decades ago?
No, I think decades ago, family had a very rigid definition, and there were some strengths. I think if we look back farther, there was many more intergenerational households, at least in the U.S., than there are now. And I would love to see that come back because I think that children keep older um, cohorts younger and younger cohorts more in a sense of tradition and understanding. But I'm also glad that we've broken some of the past definitions of family to allow people who may not have been born into a family that is as supportive of them to find the family that makes them feel supported and loved.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. And how would you define boundary ambiguity, especially when it comes to family roles? What does it look like?
Yes, I think boundary ambiguity comes back to that idea of closeness and flexibility that we talked about earlier, that everybody has different roles within the family, and there needs to be a level of flexibility when it comes to determining who owns what roles within the family. But at some point, then someone has to take ownership. I can give you a more tangible example with money. What we find in couples is it's very hard to have a completely shared ownership of the finances because at a certain point oftentimes one person has to be the executor who signs the check or sends the bill or whatever it is. So we tend to find in most couples there is a driver of the finances, but that role needs to be determined by their desire to take on the role and the partner's desire not to take on the role. And that might change. Maybe your partner's work gets busier and they need to lean on you more. Maybe you become more interested in your finances and want to take a more leadership role and they need to acquiesce a little bit. And so that idea of being understanding that it doesn't need to be a rigid role, but there has to be a sense of who's in charge and that it's done in a choice, not in a requirement.
Yeah. And how do boundaries differ between family members with varying roles? Like, for example, parents versus children and versus like spouses.
Yeah. I think that one of the things interesting about, for instance, money is that having experiential experiences working with money is very helpful for children. So it's wonderful to give the child the role of saving their own money or of determining what are they going to spend on and what are their financial goals and things like that. That sense of giving them a chance to practice with their finances is a great role to acquiesce them. In finances, oftentimes the problem can happen where the role ambiguity becomes too cloudy when there is stress in the parental load because the parents still need to protect their child from financial stress beyond their developmental age. And so, let me give a really a stressful situation like you're losing your job as the primary caregiver, primary breadwinner in your family. Your children at different ages need to be aware of the shifts, could be understanding of how they might have to shift their behaviors in light of this change, but they don't need to understand that you're crying at night. They don't need to understand that you're worried about losing the home. They don't need to understand that stress. And when that line between parents and child gets too blurry, financial enmeshment or parentification can happen and cause too much stress on the child. And that has been linked to outcomes like substance use and depression and anxiety as well.
Yeah, I've seen like both of these situations play out in my personal life. And I have to say that I'm really thankful for my parents during financially difficult times, not letting me in on the emotional turmoil of it. I actually have no idea if they went through emotional turmoil at all because the image I have of my parents' emotions are like they aren't really there, as in like they can experience like happiness and sadness or whatnot, but they've been so great at shielding me from that kind of emotional distress that I've never had to see it, and I'm really grateful for that. Whereas like I've seen some of my friends who their parents have done the opposite thing. They've always known about the financial stress and the emotional turmoil that comes from that. And of course, I think it's good to be aware of the financial situation, but they've always been so exposed to the emotional part of it that they felt the need to support their parents from a very young age. So yeah, I can definitely, yeah, sorry.
And your listeners are probably going to get a little frustrated with me saying this, but again, it's the idea of balance because um, just mimicking the structure of Freakonomics, there's also this great book called Nurture Shock, which was about what research gets wrong around child development, right? And so it's going to sound like a long digression. I promise to come back on how balance in sharing with their children is important. We don't want them to know that emotional stress or fears, but we want them to have some insights on our financial situation. So Nurture Shock did this great study on children in the 90s because in the 90s like Oprah and Phil all the like daytime hosts in the different countries started talking about how you don't fight around your kids. It's bad for your kids to fight around. And I think we all recognize that children seeing high conflict and not appropriate conflict resolution is very negative on outcomes. So they were right about that. But they actually engaged all these parents and said, don't fight at all around your kids, right? And then they waited 10 years and they interviewed the children and they were expecting the children to be doing fantastic, right? Like they've never seen their parents fight what? They found the opposite. They found that children lacked conflict resolution skills and they lived with a lot of high anxiety because they would see the beginning of tension develop between their parents. Then they never got to see the parents resolve the conflict. It just kind of flittered away. And so they didn't have a chance to see those model those skills of conflict resolution nor see the resolution. And so it was fascinating to the things with money is that we want to not hide and be secretive around money, but we also want to make sure we're protecting them from financial distress and discomfort.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so with that case study in mind, what would you recommend here? So from what I imagine, like if I had children and I had a fight with my spouse in front of the kids, I would like naturally think to resolve the conflict behind closed doors because it's a bit more private and I can think a bit better. Would you like recommend, for example, kind of staging this conflict resolution again, just to model it for the kids, or
Yeah, and I think it depends on what the conflict's about, depends on how heated you are. One of the things that was I think one of the worst pieces of advice we give new couples is to not go to bed angry. I think that's the worst piece of advice because sometimes you just need to go to bed because you're too physically aroused. Sometimes you just need to take a break because you need a Snickers bar. Like sometimes resolving conflict actually does better after a timeout where you can reflect and calm down. And so I don't think you should go into high conflict in front of your children. But I think if you're just frustrated, I think finding a way to talk to your partner about your frustrations in a kind and kind of Gottman kind of way is beautiful. And the more you can practice it, thinking about the children's observations, the more it'll become natural. That conflict is more a conversation and getting to understand each other's needs better rather than a fight.
yeah. And from what you've seen, what are the usual challenges that arise when attempting to set healthy boundaries in a family?
Oh, I think so much of it is that families do tend to have homeostasis, that they're used to enacting a dance with each other. And so when we are trying to put a new boundary up, like for instance, like in the US, a lot of times one form of financial enmeshment that could take place is that the child has to be the translator for different services. And so they may have to call up the person that they owe money to and explain that they can't pay the money, right? That sometimes is a necessity, but if the family creates a more of a support network around them and can find someone else to take that role or develop some more skills to speaking, they can take back that role. But oftentimes they're so used to the child doing it that they just continue the dance even when it's not required. And so I think that idea of homeostasis is important to remember. Like just because one of us wants to change doesn't mean that the family is ready to change. And oftentimes I think what helps is kind of being a truth speaker and recognizing other person's perspective. Like, I know you've gotten accustomed to me taking care of you in this way, or I know you've gotten accustomed to me taking care of this, but I gotta tell you what's going on from my perspective so that maybe we can shift that role.
Yeah, okay, that's really good advice. And what are the potential consequences of am- ambiguous or unhealthy boundaries in a family? What are the the potential situations that a family could get into when this is prolonged?
Yeah, so maybe I'll come back to one of my early studies that I think that is the reason I'm on this show, even though I haven't talked about it all. And that was we back in 2008ish looked at military couples who were going through deployment cycles. In the U.S., the couples tended to be what you would call like traditional or conservative families, where the service member was a man who was the breadwinner, and the wife tended to not make as much. This is a whole other research area, but it's because of the deployment and the relocation cycle causes military spouses more difficulties getting a job. But anyway, that is what it tends to be. And so we studied role ambiguity around money during the deployment cycle because oftentimes the service member was in charge of the money. Deployed, their partner would have to take over the role. When they came back, they expected to go right back to how it was beforehand. And prior to research like mine, the military had actually advised couples to not talk about money prior to the deployment because they didn't want to add additional stress to the service member. And this is something generalizable. People tend to avoid talking about money in all walks of life, in the family, with our friends, anywhere because we think it's going to avoid financial stress. But research suggests by avoiding the conversations, it actually causes more problems down the road. But with these military couples, they were being advised not to talk about it. And we found that couples that didn't have a balanced level of flexibility and closeness and didn't have those conversations around whose job around the finances is whose, actually experience marital dissatisfaction and distress. And so not only might you have financial consequences of not having good management around your money, but your marriage would actually be impacted. Um, with children, there's been a lot of research of when the parents rely too much on the children for financial roles or use their child as someone to process their emotions about their financial stress too. Uh, the researchers actually found that the children actually experience mental health issues and financial issues later in life from that experiences. So enmeshment can lead to a host of issues. I think the research suggests very similar to any kind of parentification research outcomes.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I was just reading yesterday about psychological flexibility, which is kind of like what this sounds like. You know, if these couples are psychologically flexible in their relationship, they tend to have better outcomes because, well, flexibility and adaptability, that's how we survive as humans as well, bringing it back to like an anthropological, you know, take on that. But yeah, I find that fascinating as well. And do you know of what kind of conversations these may look like? You know, if a couple is feeling inflexible at the moment, wants to be flexible, wants to have healthy boundaries, and wants to go down that route. Yeah, what would those conversations look like?
Well, I'm a big fan that practice makes perfect. And I think oftentimes we avoid the financial conversations until it's surrounding some fire or some stressor event or some catastrophe happening. And I wish more couples had practiced having money conversations without that high of stakes, right? And so oftentimes I encourage couples to start having money conversations about goals, about dreams, about their best case scenarios. There's a great article by Mumford and Weeks called The Money Genogram. And they have a list of like all these beautiful questions couples can ask each other about like, what did your parents do right around money? What were they doing right about their roles around money? What are some things that they shared that you want to bring on to your new relationship around financial roles or financial decision making? And I love that idea of having practice in the positive ones. Like I say this on too many podcasts, but my husband and I love doing a lottery ticket date. Do you guys have lottery tickets over there with scratch offs and stuff?
Yeah, we do. I've
Yeah.
seen them. I've never used them before.
Okay. They're not very good financially speaking, so don't go buy a bunch. But I like to buy a big one in the US called Powerball where you can win a lot of money, like unlimited, not like I have millions and millions, right? And my husband and I go on a date and we're like, if we actually won the Powerball, what would be different about our life? What would we spend more time doing? What would we spend less time doing? Who would we help us with some of the tasks in our life that we don't want to do? What passions are we putting off because we don't have the time or the energy or the money to do? And so that money conversation isn't, oh, who's going to spend less money? It is, what are your dreams? What do you want out of your life? Like, what are your values? And you have enough fun conversations like that. Then you can get into the more conflictual areas, knowing that you have all this, I don't know, goodwill and understanding between each other to go into it.
Yeah, my partner and I actually do that inadvertently just for fun, and I have to admit it is fun to think about, but also kind of puts you both on the same page, and you get to know each other a bit better as people, and we like to ask like, or if you had this amount of money, what would you do? And our answer is always the same, which is like buy a house, like just we're just gonna buy a house. Literally, that's it. It's this is why, like, it's so like well, because we're in the same boat, kind of like we want to have stable housing. We don't want to move around anymore. It's really difficult, but we just don't have the money for a deposit. And we also don't want to pay a mortgage because of the fluctuating inflation and all that, the volatility. So being able to pay full in cash is a dream for everyone, and we just like we see that as like the ultimate necessity, and that's really put us on the same page. So
Well, let me push
yeah,
you on another date idea. Okay.
yeah.
Have you ever heard of the miracle question from solution focused therapy?
No.
Okay. So the miracle question, whenever you feel like this one thing needs to get in place before you can be okay. In this case, having enough for that down payment, like everything kind of is stuck until then, right? I always do the miracle question on myself, right? When I feel like I have no options, because there's always more options, right? So for instance, during COVID, when things were so rough, right? I did the miracle question, and what you say is if a miracle happened tonight and you have no idea that a miracle happens, so you can't say, I have enough money in my account for the down payment or COVID's over. You don't know, right? You had to tell me instead, what are all the little clues that you'll notice as you go through your day that tells you something's different about your life, right? And so for me during COVID, I was like trying to juggle my children and work, and I'm just a little overwhelmed, right? And it was always like, I just need childcare. I just need childcare. I need people to be healthy so that I can have childcare, right? And I was so fixated on. And then I started going through like, what were the little signs that I would know that a miracle happened? And it wasn't having childcare. It was about waking up and being present for myself for a few minutes before I jumped into caretaking mode. It was about segmenting time so that when I was with the children, I was focused on them. Even if it was only a half an hour, I was totally focused on them instead of always being halfway between both worlds, right? And so I started to go through all these little things that I could change without COVID going away. Like I could take 15 minutes to take a shower before I ran downstairs. I could say intentionally, hey, these 20 minutes are for my girls right now and not look at my phone for 20 minutes. Those things I still had power over inside of COVID. And so that miracle question, I think is beautiful whenever we feel stuck to help us say, okay, I don't have control over this, but what are the things I can control that are part of the solution?
Yeah, that's a really good way of framing it. And I feel like it's a great practice as well to just help with psychological flexibility in general, because sometimes we just get so fixated, on the problems that we have that we forget. There's certain things that we can, we might not be able to fully solve the problem, but we can work around it. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that. So the next thing I wanted to ask you as well is that um, I would love to know what parents could do to ensure that they're establishing clear and consistent boundaries for their children. What they can do to keep themselves in check, and any self reflection kind of exercises that would work.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the big things, and it sounds so corny, but like on the airplane, they always say you have to put your oxygen mask on before you can put the oxygen mask on another. And that's very true with boundaries, that you have to make sure that you are emotionally well. And if you're not feeling emotionally well, that you know who is a person for you to talk to that's outside your children, right? So if you are emotionally distressed, you have a counselor to help, or a best friend, or a sister that is someone that can manage your emotions and help you get to a higher level of well-being. I think the second thing is with money, if you think about it, is that if you're experiencing a lot of financial distress, that making sure that you've done everything in your power to separate what you have control over with your finances and working to put a game plan in place, and what you don't have control over, and having those coping mechanisms in place so that, again, that emotional distress is not spilling over into your children. I think the more work we can do as individuals to have understanding of our own money beliefs, our own money story, our own money traumas, because with money, I think there are these big T traumas that we could think of, like bankruptcies or job loss or housing or food insecurity. But there are also these small T financial traumas that we experience throughout life, watching our parents fight about money, having embarrassment about not earning as much as our peers, or feeling like isolated from peers because we make too much. Like there's all these like small financial traumas that we experience that can be very, for a lack of a better word, triggering, and that oftentimes we ignore because we're like, it's just money. It's not that big a deal. It can be a big deal. And so recognizing those traumas and making sure that you've processed them, worked through them, and have a healthier relationship with your own money story, I think it's the first step for parents.
Yeah, and conversely, a lot of adults who have experienced unhealthy boundaries with their parents from a young age, they tend to carry this throughout their adulthood, even though they try to set boundaries, right? So, what advice do you have for them to set boundaries with their parents?
Yes. I think oftentimes there's a couple things I want to think about. Like if you're already hurting from the lack of boundaries that the conflict you might experience is not going to be worse than the consistent frustrations of not having boundary. And so change is hard and change may cause a destabilization. But as long as all the people in place have the best intentions for each other, going through the journey of conflict will make you closer in the end. Like, I am a conflict avoidant to my bones. I hate having conflict. And I once heard that if you don't have conflict with others, that you're never giving them a chance to know your needs, your wants, and therefore never giving the chance for others to take care of you to the point that you can love them. So in a sense, by not going to your family and being open and honest about your needs, your boundaries, you are not letting them love you the way that you deserve to. And so you are never going to be as close as you want. And so the conflict outweighs the discomfort of the conflict.
Right. And that's really something that is really important to keep in mind for oldest daughters as well, because
Yes.
we are so used to being kind of like the caretaker of the siblings that sometimes it just it ripples through to other relationships as well, with friends or like chosen family, for example. Um, and it's really important to recognize that. And I know this isn't technically like in line with the topic exactly, but I imagine it is not a rare experience for oldest daughters to have this issue with boundary ambiguity in families and have the oldest daughter experience. So, out of curiosity, what is your advice for oldest daughters who have difficulty setting boundaries in other relationships as well and putting themselves first, kind of?
Yes. I am completely plagiarizing Brene Brown's work because Brene Brown has done a lot of really good writing on when you feel like you have to manage other people's emotions. That is actually a trauma response. And I'm not saying that all oldest daughters do, but I think oldest daughters have this sense that we have to make sure everybody else is okay before we ourselves are okay. And so I guess my advice is to read Brene Brown or watch her specials. I also think it is a focus on what you deserve, that your feelings, your needs are just as important as other people, which is very easy for me to say and not easy for me to do. And I think being very clear that, again, that if you want to give the gift of having other people actually know you and love you and be close to you, we have to get uncomfortable conversations to be vulnerable to do that with others.
Oh, I just despise uncomfortable conversations. I
I
just,
know. It's hard.
yeah, I
Yes.
don't like them at all. I never realized I was an avoidant until like now, with talking about like conflict and how much I hate it. Like I'm comfortable generally in, my romantic relationship, because to me that's like it should be a safe space for you to bring it up. But it's not as normalized to have these conflicts, to be comfortable with conflicts in other relationships, right? And
Yes.
it just feels so wrong to me. But that's definitely something I know now. I know now that I should work on. So thank you for that. And lastly, saying no can be a hard task for those with people pleasing tendencies as well, which I think falls into the oldest daughter syndrome kind of, I think. So, and you mentioned earlier in the podcast about was it the book about saying no? Was that right? Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit, especially when faced with mechanisms like guilt tripping. What is your advice for saying no in a firm but effective manner?
Yeah. Well, I think one advice for people pleasers is that so often we spend a lot of times rehearsing our conversations. Like, I'm about to say no to this person, it's going to be hard. So we play out these fights in our head that is exhausting. And so when we get to finally have that chance to say it, we like spit it out so fast. You're like, we've already done it 100 times. We're so tired. And so I think rehearsing less can actually be beneficial for us. I think also there's great work by the movement called nonviolent communication that talks about how you can break down when you want to say no into your perceptions and what you're feeling. And that helps people say yes to you, if that makes sense. So explaining, like, let's just use the New Year's party, for example. Like, if it might be, I'm going to put words in your mouth and just ignore me, but it's like, maybe it's like a crowd, or maybe it's like getting dressed up, or maybe it's like driving on New Year's, which is awful, or maybe it's money, or maybe it's the people who are going to be there, or a million of those other things that are causing it. But at the end of the day, it is making you uncomfortable to think about having to do that. It feels like work rather than something that should be joyful, right? And so it's so amazing to hear someone else say, like, I really want this experience so that I can have a joyful New Year's. We'd be like, heck yeah. But when we think of telling someone else, this is my need, it's scary. And I think uncovering the why that we're so quick to put our needs first can be very insightful. And so in my own story, like in my training program, I had to do something called a genogram that I mentioned earlier. And it was so insightful to think about, like, what was this underlying pattern that I was reenacting through generations of generations. And I could see the firstborn daughter or the people pleasers going back 3, 4 generations, right? And I realized one day that it's much easier to follow our parents' script than to create a new script. And so we might have seen our parents enacting the same behaviors. And so recognizing, like, now I want to write a new script about who it would be is pretty scary, but it can be beautiful when we do it. So I forgot the
Yeah.
original question. I hope I kind of touched on it.
You did pretty much. It was about saying no for people pleasers who
Yes,
have a difficult time doing that.
yes.
And
And no is a full sentence. I love that phrase. Like, no is a full sentence. Like, I don't think I've ever done that. I'm like, no, I'm sorry, but blah 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 blah. So, but I also have to
same.
I have to use ChatGPT in my emails now to remove the I'm sorry's and the exclamation marks. I have like this thing on my ChatGPT, like, that I have like the prompting to say, make sure I don't use more than one exclamation mark. Make sure I don't say I'm sorry, and make it as kind as possible. And it's amazing. I'm like, why did I say I'm sorry? Like, what? Yeah, it's a good trick.
That is so true. That's something I should start doing because I have a tendency to apologize professionally like twice in the same email. Like,
Yes. Oh my gosh.
again, I'm deeply sorry for I apologize deeply, sincerely,
Yeah.
like multiple different ways. And
Right.
I read somewhere that also does, it doesn't quite give it doesn't quite convey the effect that you're hoping for in the sense of like sometimes it can strike people as like unconfident, you know.
Yeah. No, it's
So that's
true.
something, yeah, something to keep in mind as well. But I'm just like I'm terrified of offending people. I don't
I
know why.
know.
And I notice as well that my notes always come with some like short paragraph. Like I have to add on more context for my no, for my situation or something like that.
Yes.
So
It's a full
yeah.
sentence.
Yep. No. Thanks. With a heart.
No, thanks. There we
No.
go.
With a heart.
You did a good people pleasing to that no as a full sentence.
Okay, so thank you so much for sharing your advice with us. Now let's move on to the practices and habits section, which I feel like we've touched on a few already, but we'd love to hear more specific examples. If you have like a stellar example to give us, that would be perfect. So,
Yes.
what habits, activities, or exercises would you recommend a family practicing to establish healthier boundaries?
I love this. So my first one is an individual exercise for parents. It is called like the worry hour. And it's when you have to, before you decide, I'm going to make a change. We've never talked about money. We've never had financial conversations. Before you actually start enacting those financial conversations, spend a week just spending like as close to an hour as you possible, writing down all your money worries, like everyone you can imagine. It'll be way less than you think it's going to be, but write them all down and then separate into things that you can control and things you can't control. For the things you can control, make sure you have a financial plan in place. Maybe, like, for instance, I had $100,000 in student loans when I graduated my PhD. They officially are paid off like 2 years ago. We paid it off. But for that while, it was a lot of money. And I would always be like, oh, I'm so stressed about this money. I had no power to pay off all 100,000. I had power to say, let me do $50 more a month or whatever I could do at that developmental stage. And so making that plan for the stressors you can control and taking out the things you can't control before you engage. And then after that, I think there should be a monthly CEO meeting where the partners get together and talk about goals and visions, just like any kind of CEO, where what are your individual couple and family goals? Too often we only think of individual goals or family goals. You need to have all three in place. Maybe your individual goal is I want to decrease the number of coffees I buy a week so that I can get a massage every 6 months. Or maybe your couple goal is we're going to go on a vacation just one night, just the two of us. Or maybe your family goal is we're going to save for our daughter's car. But like breaking it down into all three is key for that CEO meeting. And then for the family, I think the goal is really focusing on understanding the children's roles and teaching the difference between wants and needs and helping kids recognize that like giving is more powerful than anything. So like oftentimes kids get birthday money and we immediately say, what are you gonna spend on? In my family, we break it down and say, how much are you spending? How much are you saving? And how much are you giving? Because giving is going to give you more joy than anything else.
Yeah, that's a really cute exercise. I love that so
Yeah.
much.
They
And
even have little like
yeah,
jars you can buy now that have all three in a piggy bank. So you can give, what is it? Like give, save, and spend. And I love that with
yeah,
kids.
that would have been adorable. And I find it so endearing how different kids have like their own idea of how to spend money as well. Like I remember when I was younger, because I had like barely any like real life perspective on money, I would spend basically all of it, because also because I wasn't allowed to buy much with, like at all, like aside from necessities. So I was like, that's it, I'm gonna buy this thing that I see everybody have, like a Tamagotchi or something like that. And then my youngest brother, ironically my youngest brother would be the one who's like, yeah, I'll save everything and I'll just, when it piles up, I'll donate to a charity. And it's so cute. Yeah, and I just love I mean, I'm not looking to start a family or anything like that, but you know, I see like children like have their own ideas on how to spend money, and I think it's adorable. So I think it would be fun for parents to look at as well, and good practice for the children. So thank you for sharing that. And what do you think are some of the typical challenges that arise when people attempt to practice these?
Yeah, I think not knowing what's developmentally appropriate. And there's a great website, cfpb.org, that actually has Know As You Grow for financial conversations. So it'll tell you here are great conversations to have kids for kids 3 to 6. Here are great conversations for 8 to 10, and give you different ideas of like, oh, I don't need to talk to them about 401ks, but I can talk to them about giving to other people or what the difference is between a need and a want. And so it's a really great resource for what to talk about, which is often the hardest first step.
Yeah, that's a wonderful resource. We'll have to link them in the show notes. Because yeah, people like me, I have really a really hard time telling, like, being able to tell like what I can say around a kid, because
Yes.
like I had experience holding my baby brother like 10 years ago, 16 years ago now, and like from then never really touched a kid again. So
And don't worry, every
like
kid's different. I was working on my dissertation when my oldest was born, and so she had to listen to my methods and my analysis out loud because I was processing aloud. So I think kids just like to be talked to.
yeah, that is true. Kids do like to be talked to. Okay, well, good to know anyway. And like, yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Now let's move on to the open mic section. This is your chance to talk about anything that you're passionate about, and it doesn't have to be related to the topic. So the floor is entirely yours. Please take it away.
Excellent. So I guess I'll start with my book. I have a book. If anybody in the audience is a financial practitioner, I have a book on counseling skills for practitioners, not how to be a therapist, but how to handle conversations around medical diagnoses or grieving, how to handle conflict and things like that. So it's called Financial Planning Counseling Skill. I hope other people check out my research. You can find me on Google Scholar profiles. And yes, and connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to chat with you.
Amazing. We'll link those in the show notes. And if our listeners want to find out more about you and what you do, where else can they go?
Yeah, Kansas State's website's the best. And I guess I should plug this too. I should have said it earlier, but hopefully you guys will forgive me. But Kansas State has a financial therapy certificate. It's 4 online courses that look at the intersection between money and well-being and money and relationships. So if you are a mental health professional or a financial professional interested in learning more, please check out that link as well, the K-State Financial Therapy Certificate. And otherwise, reach out to me through Kansas State's website. My email is Megan McCoy at KSU, but I spent a lot of time on LinkedIn, so that's a great resource to connect with me too.
All right, fantastic. We'll leave those in the show notes or the description if you're watching on YouTube. Thank you, Megan, for joining us today. I had such a great time talking to you. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We'll catch you in the next episode.
You've been listening to All Together, the Family Science Insights podcast, produced by the Family Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it so that we can grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at fa.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Dina Sargent. Thanks for tuning in.